It happened in front of hundreds of employees, and nobody expected the proud CEO to laugh at the poor single father standing in worn-out shoes while holding a faded lunchbox that had clearly been repaired more than once. One careless joke echoed through the bright corporate lobby, and the room filled with uncomfortable laughter. The father lowered his eyes, picked up the papers he had accidentally dropped, and quietly walked away without defending himself. But before that same afternoon ended, the CEO would discover a decades-old photograph hidden inside her late father's office, the only picture in which her father had ever smiled with genuine happiness, and standing beside him was the very man she had publicly humiliated. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, take a moment to like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us humanity is always stronger than pride. Autumn sunlight poured through the towering glass walls of Hawthorne Dynamics, one of the country's fastest-growing engineering companies. Employees hurried through the polished lobby carrying laptops, coffee cups, and ambitious dreams. At the center of that busy morning stood Celeste Hawthorne, the company's young CEO. She was respected for her intelligence, admired for her determination, and feared for her impossible standards. Since inheriting the company after her father's passing 2 years earlier, she had transformed the business into an industry leader. Investors praised her. Business magazines celebrated her. Yet those closest to her quietly admitted that success had hardened her heart. She measured people by efficiency, appearance, and results, believing weakness had no place in leadership. Across the same lobby entered Graham Mercer, a maintenance technician hired only 3 weeks earlier. His uniform was clean but faded from years of washing. His boots had been carefully stitched after splitting at the seams. His old backpack carried not only his lunch but children's drawings folded neatly inside protective plastic sleeves. Graham was raising his 8-year-old daughter, Nora, alone after losing his wife to a sudden illness 5 years earlier. Every morning began before sunrise as he prepared breakfast, braided Nora's hair despite never having learned properly, packed her school lunch, and reminded her that kindness mattered more than popularity. He often skipped buying himself lunch so she could join school field trips or music lessons. Nobody at work knew how many sacrifices were hidden behind his quiet smile. That morning Graham accidentally bumped into a delivery cart while replacing a faulty ceiling light. Several folders scattered across the marble floor just as Celeste stepped out of the executive elevator surrounded by senior managers. Without thinking, she glanced at Graham's patched clothing and old lunchbox before making a sarcastic remark about whether the company had started collecting employees from roadside shelters. A few nervous laughs escaped from people afraid to disagree with their CEO. Graham simply apologized, gathered the papers, thanked the assistant who helped him, and continued toward the maintenance room without raising his voice or showing anger. The silence with which he accepted the humiliation somehow felt heavier than any argument could have been. Several employees remained uncomfortable long after the incident. They noticed Graham still greeted everyone politely, still repaired broken equipment with remarkable care, and still smiled whenever anyone thanked him. The kindness he showed after being mocked quietly challenged everyone who had witnessed the moment. Later that morning, Celeste entered the private office that had belonged to her father, Theodore Hawthorne. She rarely spent time there because every object reminded her of expectations she constantly struggled to meet. Theodore had built the company from a tiny warehouse into an international success, yet despite all the photographs displayed around the office, he appeared serious in nearly every one. Investors. Awards. Factory openings. Charity events. His face always carried determination rather than joy. That afternoon, while searching through old cabinets for legal documents requested by company lawyers, Celeste discovered a weathered wooden box hidden behind stacks of forgotten files. Inside rested old notebooks, handwritten letters, and a single photograph tucked inside a protective envelope. Curious, she carefully removed it. For the first time in her life, she saw her father laughing. Not smiling politely. Not posing professionally. laughing with complete happiness. Standing beside him was a much younger man covered in engine grease, wearing work clothes and holding a toddler on his shoulders. The back of the photograph carried a faded handwritten sentence. "The day Graham reminded me that success means nothing if you forget people." Celeste froze. Her heartbeat quickened as she stared again at the younger face. It was unmistakably Graham Mercer. Confusion replaced certainty. She immediately searched the old notebooks surrounding the photograph. One journal described the company's earliest years when Theodore had nearly lost everything after a devastating machinery accident. According to his own handwriting, a young mechanic named Graham Mercer had worked alongside him in a small repair shop. When Theodore considered giving up, Graham had convinced him to keep rebuilding. Graham refused ownership shares because he wanted to care for his growing family rather than risk financial instability. Theodore later became wealthy while Graham quietly returned to ordinary repair work. Another page explained why the photograph mattered so deeply. It had been taken after Graham spent an entire weekend repairing Theodore's first production machine without accepting payment. Theodore had written that no investor, banker, or executive had ever believed in him as completely as Graham did during those desperate days. He called Graham the finest man he had ever known. Celeste felt as though the office walls were closing around her. Only hours earlier she had mocked the very person her father respected most. She hurried through company records searching for Graham's employment application. There was no mention of his connection to Theodore. He had never used the relationship to gain opportunities. He had applied like every other maintenance worker and accepted an entry-level position without asking for special treatment. The discovery haunted her throughout the afternoon. Unable to focus, Celeste quietly observed Graham from an upstairs corridor. She watched him patiently repair an elderly receptionist's broken desk drawer before refusing the money she offered as thanks. She watched him help a nervous intern carry heavy equipment even though it delayed his own work. She watched him eat a simple sandwich while reading a handwritten letter covered with colorful crayons. When he smiled at the letter, she realized it came from Nora. The image of her father's joyful face beside Graham became impossible to ignore. Curiosity soon became something deeper. The next day Celeste visited the maintenance department under the excuse of inspecting facilities. She noticed Graham carefully restoring old office furniture instead of replacing it. When asked why, another employee explained that Graham believed repairing things taught people gratitude. He often said broken objects deserved one more chance before being thrown away. Those words echoed painfully inside Celeste because she had failed to give Graham even basic respect. Determined to understand more, she visited the local community center where Graham volunteered during his lunch breaks repairing donated bicycles for children from struggling families. The center director recognized his name immediately and described him as the first volunteer to arrive and the last to leave. When asked why he dedicated so much time despite barely supporting himself, Graham had once answered that difficult childhoods become easier when at least one adult believes in you. Celeste drove away overwhelmed by guilt. For years she believed leadership required emotional distance. Her father had believed the opposite. Over the following week she quietly reviewed archived company records from its earliest days. Graham's name appeared repeatedly in handwritten notes but never in public company history. Theodore had privately credited him with countless moments of encouragement, yet Graham had never sought recognition. While others chased promotions and praise, Graham had simply helped people because it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile Graham remained completely unaware of Celeste's discoveries. He continued arriving early, working honestly, and returning home each afternoon to Nora. Their small rented house was filled with second-hand furniture, school projects, and photographs of simple picnics in public parks. They had little money but abundant affection. One sunny afternoon the company organized a family appreciation event for employees. Graham reluctantly attended because Nora begged to see where he worked. Wearing her favorite blue dress and carrying a homemade thank you card for everyone who worked with her father, Nora wandered through the offices with wide-eyed excitement. When Celeste met the little girl, something changed inside her forever. Nora proudly explained that her father could fix almost anything except sadness because sadness needed hugs instead of tools. She described how Graham always packed her lunch with tiny encouraging notes even when he skipped breakfast himself. She spoke about how he promised that being poor never meant becoming bitter. Every innocent word made Celeste realize how shallow her first impression had been. During the event she requested permission to address all employees. The large atrium filled once again with hundreds of workers. Many remembered the painful incident from the previous week. This time the silence felt completely different. Standing before everyone, Celeste held the old photograph in trembling hands. She openly admitted that she had judged a man by worn clothing instead of extraordinary character. She explained the hidden history between Graham and her father, reading several lines from Theodore's journal describing Graham as the greatest example of integrity he had ever known. She confessed that public success had blinded her to the quiet heroes working inside her own company. Without excuses or conditions, she apologized directly to Graham before every employee. The room remained silent for several emotional seconds. Then something remarkable happened. Graham accepted the apology with the same quiet grace he had shown during the humiliation. There was no bitterness in his expression, only compassion. He later admitted that carrying resentment would only teach Nora the wrong lesson. Forgiveness, he believed, always weighed less than anger. Many employees wiped away tears. Several admitted afterward that they had laughed because they feared disagreeing with authority. They apologized to Graham as well. The story spread throughout the company, not because of the humiliation but because of the humility that followed. Celeste permanently established a new employee recognition program honoring acts of kindness rather than only financial performance. The award carried Theodore Hawthorne's name but was inspired by Graham Mercer. Every month workers who quietly helped others received public appreciation regardless of job title. Maintenance staff, receptionists, cleaners, technicians, and assistants finally received the respect they had long deserved. Graham refused promotions that would keep him away from Nora, but he accepted a new role mentoring apprentices entering the workforce. Young employees quickly learned that repairing machines was easy compared to building character. Graham taught both with equal patience. Celeste visited Nora's school fundraiser one bright afternoon after receiving a handwritten invitation from the little girl. Watching Graham proudly applaud every child's performance reminded her that greatness could never be measured by wealth alone. For the first time since her father's death, she truly understood the legacy he had hoped she would inherit. It was never about buildings, profits, or prestige. It was about treating every person with dignity. Before leaving the fundraiser, Celeste quietly placed the treasured photograph back into its protective envelope. This time she made several copies so the original remained safe. One copy hung in her office where every visitor could see Theodore Hawthorne laughing beside Graham Mercer. Beneath it rested a simple plaque bearing the words her father had written decades earlier: "Success means nothing if you forget people." Years later employees would tell new recruits the story behind that photograph. It reminded everyone that the most valuable people inside any company were not always the ones wearing expensive suits or sitting in executive offices. Sometimes they carried patched lunchboxes, repaired broken furniture, and quietly changed lives without expecting applause. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment and tell us what touched your heart most. Have you ever discovered that someone you underestimated was actually one of the greatest people you could have known? Your words may encourage another viewer who needs this reminder today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because the brightest legacy any person can leave behind is not the fortune they build, but the kindness they quietly plant in the hearts of others, where it continues to grow long after every photograph has faded.